Welcome back to the channel. I'm going to talk about alcohol, what you need to know. We're going to talk about the Surgeon General. We're going to talk about new wellness influencers. We're going to take a dive into the evidence, the mechanistic science, the available observational evidence. We're going to talk about what might help us along the way and what are some tips I might have at the end of this talk. But first, my background. Who am I? I'm Dr. Vinay Prasad. I'm a practicing oncologist and hematologist here at UCSF. I'm a professor in the departments of medicine, epidemiology, and biostatistics. This kind of topic is right in my wheelhouse. The intersection of cancer, the intersection of epidemiology, and the intersection of critical appraisal of medical literature. So we're going to get into it. The Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, he has issued a swan song. His new guidance on alcohol is coming just as he's getting the boot from his office. And he wants to put a warning label on alcohol saying that even at very low amounts, it causes increased cancer. And what cancers? How much? Higher alcohol consumption increases cancer, according to the Surgeon General, by 5 more women per 100 could develop cancer if they drink 2 drinks a day, or 3 more men per 100 would develop cancer if they drink 2 drinks a day. This is what he says. We're going to look to see where this evidence comes from, if it's reliable or not reliable, but this is his opinion. Alcohol is implicated in at least 7 types of cancers, according to the Surgeon General. Mouth, throat, esophagus, voice box, breast in women, liver, colorectal. I just want to make one point right off the top. These cancers that he's linking alcohol to the cancer are also cancers where smoking has been linked to the cancer. For instance, mouth, throat, esophagus, voice box, these are smoking-related cancers. An open question is always, when you do alcohol research, are you finding the unique effect of alcohol on the cancer, or is alcohol just a stand-in variable for smoking? Because smoking and alcohol go hand in hand. People who drink a lot like to smoke. People who smoke a lot like to drink. And there may be unadjusted for smoking that alcohol, the variable, is capturing. In other words, among people who smoke a certain amount, the people who smoke the highest might be coding themselves as higher alcohol intake. Alcohol may be a proxy for smoking that's not fully captured. How might not it be captured? If you don't capture the exact number of cigarettes per day, but put people in groups or bins or tertiles of use, which we're going to talk about, you might not fully capture the full effect of smoking. So there is likely residual confounding here. And so it's important to know, is alcohol only linked to these smoking-related cancers? That would be a sign that perhaps something else is at play. Unmeasured confounding. What about breast cancer? Breast cancer we're going to talk about a little bit. It's a unique cancer because they're screening for breast cancer. So that's a unique cancer. Liver, colorectal. Okay. Before we get into this topic, I think we need to take a look at the landscape of how much Americans drink. We forget, but many Americans drink nothing at all. This is a graph that shows deciles of alcohol consumption. So every 10% of people stratified from those who drink the least to those who drink the most. And you can see rather clearly that the bottom 30% of Americans don't drink anything at all. They're teetotalers. Then the 4th decile are people who might have a 0.02 drinks per week, people who drink just at New Year's or Christmas. The 5th decile, 0.14 drinks per week, very little alcohol consumption. 0.63 drinks per week in the 6th decile. And it's really the 8th, 9th, and 10th decile that do all the drinking for the rest of us. I mean, they're doing all the drinking 6 drinks a week, 15 drinks a week, or 73 drinks a week. It's a very interesting distribution where so many people drink so little and a few people drink a lot. That's the distribution of America. People who drink nothing at all is a motley crew. There are people who never drink because of religious reasons and they have other beliefs and practices. There are people who don't drink because they can't afford to drink. There are people who don't drink because they have a problem drinking and they gave up drinking because they went to AA. There are people who don't drink because they have cirrhosis or active hepatitis. It's a motley crew of people. But what we're interested in is the causal question, that if I advise you to drink or not to drink, if you go up by 1 or down by 1, or up by 2 or down by 2, will you get a health benefit? That's the causal question. That's what the Surgeon General is supposed to be addressing. By comparing drinkers to never drinkers, you're not going to get at that question because you're comparing 2 fundamentally different groups of people. So what kind of data does the Surgeon General rely upon? This is an example of the data he relies upon. This is also cited by Emily Oster. This is a large meta-analysis that appeared in The Lancet called Alcohol Use and Burden for 195 countries and territories, a systematic analysis of the globe and burden of disease study. So what do the authors here do? The authors take data from many observational studies run in many countries where we perform some questionnaire to figure out how much people drink, and we link it to a set of outcomes like what cancers they get, how long they live, whether or not they get cardiovascular disease, and here's what they find. If you pool all these studies and then you fit it with a regression line that kind of averages the effect across all these studies, here's what you find. Relative risk 1 means it's standardized for people who don't drink at all, and then it's showing you the increased risk per drinks per day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 along the x-axis. And the risk goes up from like 1 to just under 2 if you drink like 12 drinks a day. And you can see this is alcohol and colorectal cancer. A few points. One, Bradford Hill famously said that when you look at case control or observational data, if the odds ratio or risk ratio or relative risk is less than 3, you should take it with a grain of salt. Smoking, for instance, this graph, it goes odds ratio 20 or 40 if you look at people who smoke a lot versus people who don't for lung cancer. Here we're going from 1 to 2, a doubling of risk. So we're talking, in absolute terms, probably a very modest increased risk because there are many, many things that kill you. Colon cancer is just one of those things, and you're kind of doubling that risk of one of those things. But cardiovascular disease, the lion's share of what kills you, you're not really touching, according to this graph. Now let's look at cardiovascular disease. This is alcohol and ischemic heart disease. Oh my goodness. The curve goes below the line. If you go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, it's not until you get to like 5 or 6 drinks in a woman or a man that ischemic heart disease even comes back to baseline risk. And it doesn't go up until you get to 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 drinks. In other words, if you take this observational studies at face value, you might say there's an increased risk of cancer like colon cancer, which is common, but much less common than ischemic heart disease. But you'd have to balance that against the protective effect alcohol has on ischemic heart disease if you accept these guidance. So at first glance, the Surgeon General might be wrong because he's accepting an increased risk of heart disease, even though he's trying to squash the risk of cancer. But we'll probe these data a little bit further. I asked someone who works at me here at the VK Prasad lab in epidemiology at UCSF she's a good researcher, she runs my lab. I asked her to go through this meta-analysis and pull me a representative, randomly selected American study that's in the data set. I want American studies because the types of alcohol they drink in, say, for instance, China might be different than the US. I want an American study because I think it's most appropriate to advise the American audience. Also, China has had different patterns of wealth and prosperity since Tiananmen, and those patterns of wealth and prosperity might be linked to the ability to purchase and consume alcohol. And I can't admit to having the cultural background to know all of that history, but in the US, I think I do have the background to understand a little bit of the patterns of wealth and alcohol consumption over the last 30, 40 years. So here's a study she picked for me. Prospective study of alcohol consumption quantity and frequency and cancer-specific mortality in the U.S. population. It comes out in a pretty decent journal. This is, I think, a very representative study for the quality of the data that goes into the meta-analysis. And I always tell people, meta-analysis is like a juicer. It only tastes as good as what you put in the juicer. And my worry is, of course, that we're putting a lot of rotten fruit in that juicer. So we're going to take a look. This is a classic study where they take 364,000 people, they do alcohol questionnaires for many years, and then they link it to the National Death Index. Do they die of cancer? Which cancer they die of? They've got some difficulty defining their groups, okay? So let's talk about that. Lifetime alcohol drinking status was assessed. Okay, why am I diving into one paper? I think it's really important if you're looking at a meta-analysis to sample something in the meta-analysis and tell yourself, is this reliable or not? So I'm doing that for you. Participants who had not consumed alcohol in the past year were categorized as never drinkers if they also consumed fewer than 12 drinks in their lifetime. So never drinkers aren't just people who don't drink this year or didn't drink last year. They never drank more than 12 drinks in their lifetime. Not even in college. In 4 years of college, they kept it under 12 drinks. This is a very unique group of people, wouldn't you agree? These are people who, they didn't participate even for a moment in the party culture of college. They never had a moment in graduate education where they drank a lot. They never had a moment in their 20s where they had 12 drinks. They're less than 12 drinks lifetime. Very likely you get some certain very religious denominations in here. You get people who are teetotalers for other reasons. You might get people who have extreme poverty that can't afford to buy alcohol. You get a lot of random people in this group. Lifetime infrequent drinkers were if they consumed 12 or more drinks in their lifetime, but fewer than 12 drinks in the prior year. Okay, so, and former drinkers were if they consumed 12 or more drinks in their lifetime and 12 or more drinks in any prior year, but no drinks in the past year. So former drinkers might be somebody who'd been binge drinking for many years and then they have cirrhosis and they stop drinking. They got 12 more drinks in their lifetime and 12 more drinks in any prior year. By the way, if you have 12 more drinks in any prior year, you by definition would have 12 more drinks in your lifetime. So that's kind of redundant. I wonder if the authors know that. That's former drinkers. But former drinkers are also somebody who really sort of just had a modest alcohol consumption, one year with like 12 drinks in the year, like one a month, and then they just became teetotalers. That's also former drinkers. So it's a motley crew of cirrhotics and somebody who kind of barely drank. And then what if you were pregnant? How would you be scored here? You have 12 or more drinks in your lifetime, but fewer than 12 drinks in any prior year. You'd be a lifetime infrequent drinker. So if somebody was trying to get pregnant or were pregnant, would they be put in that bucket? I have to think through these. But to me, already, these are very crude buckets. Who picked 12? 12 is being pulled from someone's ass. It's not really based on science. Then for drinkers, they average the number of drinkers per day as 1, 2, or greater than 3 drinks per day. Okay, and they're also looking at frequency too. Here's table 1. You can already start to see some of the things that I see, and I'll walk you through them. Number 1, the mean age of a never drinker is 42. The mean age of a former drinker is 54. So in order to be a former drinker, you probably had some years where you're drinking a lot and then you stop drinking. We're already talking about different groups of people. People who are older, who probably have medical problems, medical conditions, maybe they have an alcohol problem, and people who are younger. Lifetime infrequent drinkers are somewhere in between. Light, moderate, and heavy drinkers look like they're balanced by age compared to never drinkers, but let's look at race. Non-Hispanic whites. 61% of never drinkers are non-Hispanic whites, 76% of light, 80% of moderate, and 80% of heavy. What about education less than high school? 23% of never drinkers have less than high school education, and a third have high school education, whereas among light drinkers, only 12% have less than high school, and about 30% less have high school, and then more than high school is 60%. So you already see and heavy drinkers, already the education starts to go down. More than high school is 40%. So now it's getting really confusing. Light drink, like people who didn't go to college are in the never drinker bucket, of course, because if you go to college, you're probably going to get bumped out of that bucket because you got more than 12 in your life. Easy. And light and moderate drinkers are people who have different educational attainment. And then if you look at smoking, it's also completely different. Never drinkers are also never smokers, and light and moderate drinkers are smokers. And they're only coding smoking by tertile. In other words, the third of people who smoke the least, the third of people who smoke the middle, and the third who smoke the most, and not actual number of pack years per year. So even within this bucket, you still have unmeasured confounding from the low end of the bucket to the high end of the bucket. It actually doesn't tell me how big the bucket is. Like, is 5 to 10 pack years the middle tertile? I don't know. But you're getting that unmeasured confounding. And alcohol might be a proxy for that unmeasured confounding in the bucket. So already you see this is kind of a mess. If you're an economist kind of doing this research, you'll shit your pants when you see this data. This is extremely confounded data. You're comparing younger people who didn't go to college against older people who might have gone to college against white people, against black people. You're comparing very different groups of people. It's not really getting at the causal question. It's looking at a crude association across a population. You're not adequately adjusting for smoking. Where's socioeconomic status? Socioeconomic status is completely different than education. It's not there. Nonetheless, they do a classic regression model, a Cox model. They adjust for race, ethnicity, education, region, marital status, smoking status, including tertiles of smoking. But they don't adjust for these things in a more granular way, BMI and gender as appropriate. And here's what they find. They find that cancer death is linked to alcohol consumption. Lung cancer too. If lung cancer is linked to being a light, moderate, or heavy drinker, you can see here the relative risk goes from 0.79 to 0.85 to 1.3. Heavy drinkers have more lung cancer death than lighter drinkers. Does that mean alcohol causes lung cancer? The Surgeon General didn't say that. Why is that? But if you look at the subgroup of people who are never smokers, then alcohol intake has nothing to do with lung cancer. Well, this suggests a problem. The never smoker group, if they really never smoked at all, then alcohol probably is not capturing some of the residual measurement of smoking. But in the smoking group, if you smoked at all, alcohol is probably linked to smoking. So alcohol might be, I'm sure, alcohol is a stand-in variable that's capturing the tobacco smoke that's not captured by the tertile of smoking category. It's another variable that's basically a smoking variable. And that's probably why the Surgeon General's report is giving you the smoking-related cancers, okay? Not much alcohol hits the voice box, for instance. Even if you want to talk about from biological principles, it goes down the esophagus. Don't go to the voice box. Okay, anyway. But the epidemiologic principle is that we do not have adequate balance. We don't have adequate controlling for known confounding. We have residual confounding in this data set. These are such disparate groups of people, it's very hard to draw conclusions. So we took a look at one of these studies, and what do we find? We're finding we're putting garbage in that meta-analysis juicer. We're putting a lot of rotting fruit in that juicer. What are the summary of my issues? One, alcohol's all self-reported. We left out the fact that we're not talking about how much someone actually drank. We're talking about how much they said they drank. And how much you say you drink might vary by race or ethnicity or education. It might vary by these factors, which themselves vary in the cohorts. So there may be huge issues with this data set because it's self-reported. Now, somebody said, well, how are you going to fix self-reported? You got to do self-reported. There are lots of ways you could fix it. You can run a large study. In one subgroup of this study, you can randomly sample people and give them electronic bottle caps, for instance, to keep track of their alcohol consumption. You could also, in a sample of people, with their consent, of course, go through their trash and look to see how many bottles are there to see if it correlates with what they're saying is happening in the household. You need to do something like that to validate the self-reported strategy. Two odd definitions. Why is it 12, lifetime, 12? These are very odd definitions. The never drinker group is not just people who you and I would call they don't drink. It's a group of really weird people who in their whole life, they never had more than 12 drinks. That's a very weird group of people. It's confounded, of course, by socioeconomics. They're not doing a great job of measuring that. It's confounded by smoking. There's no socioeconomic status. They don't know anything about the person's income or their wealth. And there's no separating Cabernet from Mad Dog 2020. Why? If you did a food study, you wouldn't lump 100 calories of broccoli with 100 calories of potato chips. But that's what this study does. It lumps a really nice Oakville Napa Cabernet with Mad Dog 2020. There's no discrimination there. We talk about breast cancer risk is up in this study, but there's no mammograms. What do I mean by that? Richer people participate in mammographic screening programs more than poorer people. White people participate more than black people. And nothing gives you more breast cancer incidence than mammography. This is an analysis by Welsh and colleagues in the New England Journal of Medicine that show prior to the introduction of widespread screening mammography, there's a certain incidence per 100,000 of breast cancer. After the introduction, that has gone up about 30%. It may have even doubled in some cohorts that are heavily subject to mammography. What does that mean? That means if a rich person drinks more, but a rich person gets more mammograms, a rich person is going to have more breast cancer, but it ain't the drinking, it's the mammograms that's giving you the breast cancer. Now, in a real screening program that accomplishes population screening goals, the increased incidence is natural when you debut a screening program, but it will be followed by a regression, a return to the pre-screening incidence over some period of time as everyone is caught a little bit sooner. Watch my video on mammograms on this channel to get a full understanding of why these data suggest clear evidence of overdiagnosis. But that overdiagnosis is irrelevant here in this case because I really don't even know for breast cancer what the effect of alcohol does because it's so contingent on how you look for it. With or without food, the authors have no way to differentiate people who are drinking on an empty stomach from people who pair the appropriate wine with the appropriate food, people who drink with company versus drink alone, people who exercise and also drink, which may be an effect modifier. People who are runners love to have a beer at the end of a run, at least some of them. Maybe it aids in recovery, some studies suggest. The time of day you're drinking, the temperature of the climate you're living in, whether or not a gin and tonic on a hot summer day might be different than drinking bourbon by yourself alone at night, for instance. It has no way to separate any of these other potential effect modifiers. Here's what the authors write. Alcohol quantity was associated with an increased risk of colorectal cancer mortality in women, but not in men. There's no association in men. So it causes in women, but not men. And then the association of quantity and frequency with prostate cancer was complex. Men who drank 1 to 2 days per week had a 70% increased risk of prostate cancer. But if you add that third day on top, you cut it back down to a 55% risk. Quadratic effect, significant p-value. This is preposterous. They're finding clear, just gibberish. Drinking 2 days a week is really bad for your prostate, but the third day lowers the risk. It doesn't make any sense at all. Bizarre results that are not compatible with biology. So when I see a graph like this, 7 types of cancer, I take it with a grain of salt. I put little stock that this is true. I doubt that it is true. Don't get me wrong. If you're drinking 10 drinks a day, if you're waking up with headaches, if you're not getting to work on time, if you're yelling at your kids or your spouse, it's a problem. You need to stop. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who drink 1 glass of wine a day, 2 glasses of wine a day. Is that something the Surgeon General should litigate with a warning label? Is that something he should comment on? He's commenting on it, but he's doing so on the basis of incredibly low, unreliable evidence. If you study this correctly, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a small cancer risk from low alcohol consumption. I wouldn't be surprised. but I wouldn't be surprised if there was actually a reduction in cancer from low alcohol consumption. My guess is probably no effect on survival or cancer. My guess is that alcohol's effects predominantly have to do with how we get along with others and how we feel about ourselves and our mental health. That's my guess. But I wouldn't be surprised either way. This literature is hopelessly confounded. It's entirely unreliable. It really is not suitable for drawing any conclusions. An honest arbiter of science would say, I just don't know. I'm not saying it's good for you. I'm not saying it's bad for you. I'm just saying we really do not know. We've not invested in knowing. And the fact that 1,000 shitty observational studies point in the same direction, perhaps on aggregate, doesn't prove anything. It merely reflects the biases and opinions of those in the field. It doesn't actually tell me if it's better or worse. It doesn't actually tell me the truth about science. I think that's a mistake people make. When you only have shitty data, and the biases are baked into the data, if there's a net effect in one direction or the not, it doesn't mean that that's the real truth of the result. It's probably that all the biases are systematically in one direction. All right, where was I? I got interrupted. I think I had walked you through the meta-analysis and the underlying observational data, which I consider pretty unreliable. Now let's talk a little bit about the mechanistic science. This is what the wellness industry, this is what the Surgeon General likes to say. 4 ways alcohol can cause cancer. It breaks down into acetaldehyde, which is DNA damaging. It causes oxidative stress. It alters the level of multiple hormones, and it leads to greater absorption of carcinogens. This is a very low-level, crude bioplausibility that he offers. And the problem with bioplausibility is that every single successful drug and all of the hundreds of thousands of failed drugs had bioplausibility. Everything that's a real risk relationship in epidemiology, but all the things that were spurious all have bioplausibility. You can't hang your hat on bioplausibility. In fact, you can create whatever conjecture you want in biology, and very likely you'll find some basic science study that helps you support that conjecture, but it's not a very reliable level of evidence. Most people don't base practice on it. I put it in the bottom of the barrel. To me, the totality of the alcohol literature, it looks a little bit like people with an opinion about alcohol and intuition go through sort of observational or basic science literature where there's a lot of analytic flexibility and cherry pick and selectively report and selectively publish different results that lead to a certain conclusion. But what the truth is, I think we have no clue. We have no clue about. So I want to back up. In my Substack, I talk a little bit about what it would actually take to provide some guidance about alcohol, what we should tell a healthy person, and I want to start by agreeing about the endpoints. When it comes to a complex social and nutritional intervention like alcohol, the best scientific evidence, I think, is woefully inadequate. There are 4 things that matter. 1, how long will you live? 2, how well you will live, morbidity, disability, whether you get a cancer at an untimely age, etc. 3, how happy will you be? How will you feel? 4, how happy will people around you be? How will they feel? See, I think it's wrong to reduce alcohol to just esophagus cancer and ignore cardiovascular disease. It's wrong to look at cardiovascular disease and esophagus cancer and ignore mental health. And it's simple and seductive, perhaps, to say that alcohol can only make you feel bad and it can only make others around you feel bad. But I think there's very little strong empirical evidence to support that claim. That's just anecdotal. Of course, people who have a problem drinking will report those things. But for some people, it helps ease conversations. It's led to a lot of relationships. It's led to a lot of great dinners. It's led to stronger friendships. There's a reason why so many societies have independently evolved a culture around alcohol. And it's uniquely American, I think, to focus on longevity, which my best guess is probably it has, in moderation, very little to do with that, and much less on all of these other cultural and complex interactions with food, with company, and with general well-being. I think that's much more European. An Italian, for instance, doesn't need to read an epidemiology study to know what wine pairs best with dinner and what's best served before dinner and what's best served after dinner. How would we actually get better evidence? A few years ago, there was a proposal to get better evidence. There was a large randomized control trial run by the National Institutes of Health, but the problem was Francis Collins and others were soliciting Jose Cuervo to fund it through an organization called the NIH Foundation, which is a nonprofit that's used to launder money so that the NIH can use pharmaceutical firm money and alcohol industry money. It's probably a very stupid thing to even have in the first place. I think we can do the right study, fully funded by federal taxpayer dollars. I think there's a huge appetite from the public to know the answer to the question, and here's how I envision the study. 1, we recruit people wherever they may be, And we do stratified randomization, which means we recruit in every single strata. So for instance, teetotalers who are curious about modest drinking, people who drink 1, 2, 2 or 3 drinks a day, who are curious about what would happen if they drank more or drank less. We recruit old people, but also young people. We might even recruit some people who are drinking 5 or 6 drinks a day. And we take all of these people in our stratified randomization trial and we randomize them to different bits of advice. 1, stay the course. You do what you're doing. So we'll have a group who don't drink, who keep doing that. A group that drinks 1, who keeps doing that. Arm 2, decrease your drinking by 1 drink a day. So if you drink 1, go to 0, 2, go to 1. That's the advice we give you. The next group, increase your drinking by 1 drink a day. So this will apply to the teetotalers. It'll apply from 1 to 2. And on Arm 4, decrease your drinking by 2 drinks a day. And Arm 5, increase your drinking by 2 drinks a day. Arm 6, stop all drinking if you're a drinker. And Arm 7, carpe diem, which is all we tell them, which probably means they're going to drink a fair bit. And then we follow them for all of those endpoints I discussed. We follow them for their longevity, of course, overall survival. If you accrue people in middle age and some older people, you'll probably be able to detect that over the course of 10 or 15 years. We follow them for the incidence of cancer, for complications from cancer. We won't have to deal with the fact that rich people get more mammograms because it's randomized. So mammography rates will be randomly assigned in the 2 groups, ostensibly. We follow them for mental health, how happy they are, their quality of life. We also follow them for how often they get divorced, how often they lose custody of their children, things like that, those sort of harmful effects of alcohol. We can follow them from a wealth of different endpoints. If I were a betting man, I would bet that increasing by 1 or decreasing by 2, that kind of thing, probably will have minimal to no effect on mortality. But I suspect that some of these other social dynamic endpoints will be met. I don't know if increasing from 0 to 1 may improve marriages or worsen marriages, but I suspect there might be some signal there when it comes to divorce. This is the only way to settle the question. This is what we should have done 30 years ago. This is what anyone with an ounce of sense would do. We wouldn't just speculate. We wouldn't rely on retrospective observational study that has infinite number of multiplicity and many analytic plans that are filtered through people's perceptions and cultural beliefs about alcohol in a puritanical culture like America, where, of course, teetotalers tend to dominate in these fields. Public health fields are full of people who are trying to deprive you of pleasure. We all know that. That's not the best way to get to the truth. A randomized study is the only way to get to the truth. Now you're going to say, well, some people won't follow your advice. And I'll say, good. If they don't follow the advice, the first surrogate endpoint is, do they change their drinking habits? And if the answer is that none of this advice changes the drinking habits, then let me tell you what the Surgeon General should say. He should shut the fuck up, because nothing you say will change their practice. So that'll answer a question. Does giving advice? This is a randomized trial about what advice we should give, which is the only thing doctors can do. Now, you could think this randomized trial could get more complicated. We could actually test tax strategies for alcohol, for instance. Economists would probably be more interested in those kinds of levers and policies. I think that's a separate set of studies that we can run in the future, but this is kind of the first pass. When I read things like the New York Times and I see doctors try to comment on this, I think they often don't really have a great appreciation of the underlying evidence structure of medicine. This is what I think Rachel Bedard wrote in the New York Times, quote, even though the advisory, Surgeon General's advisory, relies on mostly observational studies and not randomized controlled trials, the relationship between alcohol and cancer has been demonstrated consistently enough that we have confidence that it's reliable. It's a recurring signal heard through so much noise. That is a stupid thing to say. That's a stupid thing to say that misses the fact that when you have extreme analytic flexibility, the fact that many of the published papers reach the same conclusion tells you nothing about the truth of the scientific relationship. It just tells you what the opinions are in the field that shapes the selective reporting process, that which studies get written up, which write-ups get peer-reviewed favorably, which peer-reviewed favorably articles get accepted. It's just telling you about what the field believes. It doesn't tell you anything about the truth. It's little more than an opinion poll or self-fulfilling prophecy. She doesn't understand the nature of observational studies. This is why low-quality observational studies is why we get advice on nutrition that flip-flops. 1 year it's eat blueberries, the next year it's don't. 1 year it's drink coffee, then coffee's a poison. Butter, good for you, bad for you. Good for you, eggs. It's because it is not getting at a true causal relationship. It's just getting at what the attitudes are of that day. I suspect that public health people don't like alcohol, and that's shaping the majority of the literature. I have no clue about the truth. It could be health promoting. It could be deleterious to health. The only way to settle it is randomization. It's the only way to know for sure. Now, you'll say many people don't want to participate. They're not willing to change. That's great. They're already not willing to heed the advice of the Surgeon General anyway. So this is a study for the people who are interested in the answer, who are those who will probably be moved by the answer. I think there's little reason to oppose it. It is a best use of $100 million, $200 million probably what it costs to run. Jay Bhattacharya should champion it at NIH. A few other thoughts. Some people say that, we know alcohol's a poison alcohol's a poison. Well, water's a poison. Drink enough water, you're going to die of hyponatremia. That's not really a useful argument. Some people may say that, well, for me, alcohol is bad. Well, then you have the answer for you. You don't get good sleep. No one's forcing you to drink alcohol, okay? Some people may say, well, what about the science? We can't ignore what it does to mice. And I was like, well, if you get a mouse drunk, I don't know what that has to do with a human. You can cure mice of cancer since 1972, but we still have failed to do that for people. There are lots of mannequin studies that show cloth masks slow the spread of respiratory viruses that don't work in real life, okay? So these kind of contrived laboratory studies don't answer the salient real-life questions. So I don't put much stock in that. Finally, what do I put stock in? I think on my Substack, Vinay Prasad's Observations and Thoughts, I have 25 recommendations for alcohol. I'm going to say a few of them. I think they're a mix of serious things and jokes, which I think some people didn't appreciate, but that's the reality. When you don't have evidence, it's going to be a mix of these kinds of things. So here's the advice I tell friends and family. 1, parents should introduce children to alcohol before they go to college. The first drink a kid has should probably be a glass of wine at a holiday dinner with their parents, good wine paired properly with food, and it shouldn't be an introduction to a vodka punch at a frat party. I think that's a good rule of thumb, a part of the culture of alcohol. 2, never drink a drink you don't like. You go to a restaurant, a bar, somebody makes you a drink you don't like, just don't drink it. It's not worth it. Even if it costs $20, just throw it out. Okay? 3, don't count your drinks. If you're counting your drinks every evening, it's antithetical to the whole point of drinking, and you're not going to be any fun. 4, the best drink is the one right before dinner. 5, good food should be paired with appropriate beverages. There's a reason why the chef is pairing it with this white wine, that red wine, this beer. I often think that a good chef knows more about alcohol than a good doctor. Okay. 6, jalapenos and habaneros have no place in alcohol. I'll stand on that. Okay. 7, don't drink and watch TV. Don't drink and, zone out into the television. If you're going to drink, do it with friends, do it with family, do it in a social setting. 8, don't drink alone. Well, unless you're going to meet someone and need some liquid encouragement. 9, learn how beer, wine, and scotch are made. For drinks you like, learn how to make them. Learn some cocktails you like. Perhaps know 25 off the top of your head. If you like to drink beer, you should understand why. What's the difference between a hazy IPA and a regular IPA? What is the international bitterness unit? Why is it called the India Pale Ale? Why does it have the name India in it? Where did that come from? Where was it being made and where was it being shipped to? When it comes to Scotch, you should understand the different regions of Scotland. Why is Islay Scotch peaty? What does peaty mean? Okay. Those are useful things to know. If you want to know about wine, you should know what is the difference between California, Cabernet, Napa, Cabernet, Oakville, Cabernet. What is the difference between this? Why does this word matter? 10, pour a bunch of drinks and learn to appreciate the differences. 11, if you like red wine, take sommelier training. 12, make sure the last drink you have is an hour before you go to sleep. 13, this is the one that irritated many people. I said, you can come to my dinner party and don't drink. That's perfectly fine. But you won't be coming to the second dinner party. Okay, that was a joke. That was just a joke. Some people said it's like not inviting your unvaccinated loved ones to Thanksgiving. Okay, no, it's not. Okay, it's just a joke. And to be honest, if you can't tell it's a joke, you wouldn't be invited to my dinner party in the first place. Okay, if you can't joke, if you can't have a good laugh, you're not coming to my dinner party the first time around. So you're not going to be invited. Okay, I'm sorry to say. That's also just a joke. Okay, just a joke. Okay. 14, if you wake up with headaches or you call in sick to work, you got a drinking problem. You got to cut back. If you're having outbursts at your children or spouse, same as above. 16, drink with friends. Drinks pair best with laughter. 17, marijuana, when used in moderation, can decrease the amount of alcohol someone drinks. 18, if you have acetaldehyde dehydrogenase deficiency, you're Asian and you flush every time you drink, don't take Pepsid. You need not to drink. Your odds ratio is not 2, it's 20, okay? It's 20. You really have an increased risk of cancer, and that's like tobacco. Okay, now we're talking about evidence, epidemiological evidence. Like tobacco, you need to avoid alcohol. All right, 19, if you like red wine, buy 6 bottles at varying price points, invite a lot of people over, put them in a paper bag, randomize them, and see if you can tell which is a $10 bottle of Cabernet and which is a $150 bottle. I suspect once you get over $40 or $50, it's going to be very difficult to tell the difference between a $40 and a $250 bottle of, say, for instance, Napa Cabernet. Okay, 20, a long run deserves a cold beer. There might be a reason why people who do extreme exercise enjoy alcohol so much, both because it might help replenish whatever electrolytes or things that they're losing, but maybe also it helps them with recovery in other ways by including the pain response or complementing the euphoria of the run. 21, alcohol should be thought of like other foods. There are reasons why some alcohol are served before meals, with steak, for instance, with dessert, by the fireplace, in the summer, in the winter. Why are gin and tonics thought of as a summer drink? Why is a cold Corona best after mowing your lawn? There are reasons for these sort of cultural practices. Number 22, you know more about alcohol from a chef than an epidemiologist, and more about it from a sommelier than the Surgeon General. Number 23, people who don't drink solely because they want to maximize their lifespan are probably going to live a short and miserable life. And I really think that's true. The more you chase maximizing lifespan in the absence of credible evidence that you can achieve such a thing, you're likely to deprive yourself of things that actually are the point of life. Just like back in the day, pre-pandemic, I would routinely do bone marrow transplants on people, and they'd be extremely immunosuppressed. And sometimes they'd ask me, should I go to my grandson, 4-year-old grandson's birthday party? And doctors sometimes would say, listen, you're at high risk of getting a respiratory virus from this birthday party. And so, you know what, doc? I didn't go through the transplant not to live, not to go to these celebrations. And that's how the attitude once was. 24, some people say they feel bad when they drink. Well, then you have the answer for you. Okay, this is for people who don't necessarily feel bad, who also probably like alcohol, who have equipoise about what they should do. And number 25, if you don't know what terroir means, then you probably don't know enough about wine. We all could learn more about the process of alcohol, myself included. And that's why I wrote a post called Don't You Want to Be a Sommelier? Last point, are my recommendations evidence-based? Am I being consistent? And I write, some of my recommendations are evidence-based and some are tongue-in-cheek, and that's the point. Evidence is really inadequate for many of the most important life choices. I can't tell my patients if they should divorce their wife. I can't tell them if they should eat Indian food or Italian for dinner. I can't tell them whether to drink white or red wine with steak. Actually, I can tell them that it's red wine is the right answer, served at 65 degrees. But you get my point. There are lots of things in life that science and evidence is just insufficient to answer fully, and we have to rely on other ways and other sorts of norms to get at what we should do for ourselves. I write, humanity and alcohol are intertwined in ways far beyond medicine. There are spiritual, emotional, humanistic, cultural forces at play. It's really American to try to reduce this to life expectancy, whereas an Italian would just know the answer, and you're probably better off by going to Italy and just doing what the Italians do. For those of us who do want better science, we need simple, clear, elegant randomized controlled trials, and we need to get the money to do that. It's easy. Just fire every single one of these nutritional epidemiologists. If they're looking at blueberries or dark chocolate or whatever the fuck they're doing, fire them, take their salaries, and run the right study. We don't need these people to be doing retrospective garbage. They have no place in science. They're not really even scientists. They're kind of like amateur, they're people who just know a little bit of statistical programming, and they're quite dangerous, if you ask me. That's it. Boy. They're really angry about that not coming back to my dinner party. But again, if you can't take a joke, there's no way you'd be at my dinner party in the first place. I'm 100% sure I do not invite people who are not funny people who don't like to laugh to my dinner party. So you're not getting in the first time. But it was just a joke. Okay, it's just a joke. Okay, I don't have the time or effort at my dinner party to police how much people are drinking. So those are my thoughts on alcohol. I think the fact that lots and lots of shitty observational studies suggest something consistent doesn't mean anything at all. The fact that we're talking about cancer and not talking about cardiovascular disease, which might even be aided by moderate alcohol consumption, well, that's a big error by the Surgeon General. The fact he could put his little warning label on the bottle, what will that do? I suspect that the people who are really heavy drinkers are not going to give a shit about the warning label. It'll probably only affect the people who are very modest drinkers, that 4th, 5th, and 6th decile of alcohol consumption. It won't affect the binge drinkers. They're not going to do anything for them. Certainly not a little warning label on the bottle. And maybe it'll just increase the number of teetotalers. Whether or not that has any population health impact, whether it's positive or negative, completely unknown. The Surgeon General is very good at making recommendations without any good evidence. That's why he was pro-masking kids and pro-closing school. And the other thing to say very clearly, the Surgeon General is not chosen based on merit. They're chosen based on political favoritism. They're not the smartest doctor. In fact, I suspect bottom 50th percentile, really, but top 50th percentile when it comes to politicking. This Surgeon General, of course, famously ran doctors for Obama when Obama was a fledgling politician. And that's the only reason he became Surgeon General the first time. Not because he's a good doctor, not because he's smart, because he ran doctors for Obama when Obama was on the upswing. So he pledged loyalty early, and he happened to pick a winning horse. And that's the only reason. He doesn't know anything about science or evidence appraisal. And I look at his publication record, and it's just garbage. I mean, it's not good at all. So I don't trust him at all, and I don't take his word. And I also think that, some people said to me, you like alcohol too much. I could easily go month, 2 months, no drinking, doesn't bother me one bit. But I do understand, I can also appreciate why good wine is important. I'm not basing this based on my personal preferences here. I personally think that moderate consumption has little to do with health one way or the other. I would be more willing to bet on some of these other things, but I'm really trying to observe this question from the point of view of an objective, evidence-based appraiser who starts from a very neutral vantage point. Coming soon on the Substack Sensible Medicine, myself, John Mandrola, and Adam Sifu have all written 400 words on how we advise our patients about alcohol. Okay, we didn't talk to each other. We didn't read each other's. We all wrote ours separately. You can read what we have in common and where we differ. When it comes to the evidence appraisal, I think all three of us who are students of appraising evidence are very comparable. But when we come up to how you should talk to someone about that, I think we're very different. So there are two parts to this. But from an evidence standpoint, I think the only thing to say is doctors, public health, we just don't know that much. I think it's important for public health to be quiet when we don't have strong evidence. It's really vital because the only way you preserve your credibility in the public eye is if you show you don't comment when you don't know. And that's not what the Surgeon General did. I don't know why he's putting this report out before he gets booted from his job, but I am glad to see him booted from his job because he did a terrible job, and he is named as the defendant, I think, in Missouri versus Morthy, which is the censorship case, which will once again, I think, come to the Supreme Court because he was involved in that censorship that you can learn more about in my prior video about Mark Zuckerberg and learn more about mammography in my mammography video. If you like this evidence appraisal from the point of view of a practicing oncologist and professor of epidemiology, like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Follow me on Substack, on Instagram, where I now appear. Follow me on Twitter, of course, and I'll be back with more videos in the weeks to come.